Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Thursday, the 14th of October. With Robert Murray McShane's readings, today we read 1 Kings chapter 17. In chapter 16, we read that Ahab had become king of Israel, and he was more evil than all the kings that had gone before him. So in chapter 17, God sends Elijah, a prophet, and Elijah warns the king and says, because of your evil, God's sending a drought. And there's going to be no rain for the next number of years. And that's exactly what happened. Elijah was protected by God, and he went and hid in a ravine where there's a brook of water, and the ravens brought him food. Eventually, the brook dried up, and God then sent Elijah to the nation of Sidon, to the town of Zarephath, to a widow who would look after him. And in verse 10 we read, so he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and said, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called and said, bring me please a piece of bread. And she says to him, I've got nothing left. I've got a small handful of flour, a tiny bit of oil in a jar. I'm about to make a last piece of bread for my son and I. We're going to eat it and die. And Elijah's response to her is, God says, first make me some bread, then do what you said, because God has promised, says that your jar of flour is not going to empty, your jar of oil is not going to run dry. You will have food until it rains. And in verse 15 we read, she went away and did as Elijah told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry. And a couple of things struck me. The one was just the effect of a drought. Now, Ahab had committed the sin, but the judgment affected everybody. And we've just come back from a short break, coming through the Karoo, and we stayed on a farm, and the farmer was saying they're in the midst of a drought which has been going on for 9 years. They've had below average rainfall. And if you accumulate it over the last 9 years, they've had a meter less rain than they should have. And when you're only having 200 mils of rain a year, that's a lot of water you're short of. And you see the effects of drought on people. And I struck, the king had sinned, but the drought affected the whole nation. And one is reminded of that saying in African saying, when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And we see that in the country with the amount of suffering that is caused by the corruption and nepotism at the top. They don't suffer, the people on the ground do. So we need to be praying that the kings, the leaders will be turned. And the second thing that struck me was that this woman was provided for. But I would have liked, if it was me, for as I look at the Lord and think, oh, we get down to our last 5 kilograms of flour and it's running short of eggs and things are not looking terribly good, for God to step in at that point. But he didn't. She was down to her last handful of flour and her last tiny bit of olive oil. She was at the end. And only then did God come and provide for her. And while I think most of us, but certainly I, would like God to act sooner, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes things get worse. It's not that we've been abandoned. It's just that we haven't reached the point where he will act. And a third point was just that we're told she went and did what Elijah told her. We sometimes think God will act, but he acts when we are obedient. And so be encouraged that in suffering, we're caught up in it. We're the grass that gets trampled. It's part of how things have been and always will be. But God is there. God does provide. We just need to be obedient. So be encouraged as you go through life, being obedient, knowing God's provision. And that is our blessing.